My name's Jeff Riley. I am the superintendent or the state-appointed receiver of the Lawrence Public Schools. Lawrence is the first city in Massachusetts to go into state receivership for poor performance, among other things. A statistic I saw recently was that we are the 13th poorest city in the country. Well over 90% of my kids qualify for free or reduced lunch. We have high concentrations of second language learners as well as special needs students. I am a parent of 2 children in the Boston Public Schools, and I'm proud to say that. I'm going to do a presentation via PowerPoint today, but I recognize that friends don't let friends do PowerPoint, so I promise to talk off the slides and not read them to you. How about that? Okay. Yay! Oops, we've already messed up our... All right. Whoops, no. Okay. Very sensitive, this. So my background is in middle school. I was a special ed teacher. I was a counselor. I was an assistant principal, a principal, and eventually the deputy superintendent of all the middle schools in K-8s in Boston. Spending over 20 years of my life with 13-year-old children changes a man. So this may not be your typical presentation. You can look at the slide now. Before talking about the work in Lawrence, I think it's important to put this in kind of an historical context. The next slide that you're going to see basically shows from the Southern Education Foundation that 51% of American public school children are now living at or near the poverty line. That is, they qualify for free or reduced lunch. This is a staggering statistic, and it speaks to the loss of the middle class in this country. As someone who's raised by a Marine, on the idea of a meritocracy, the idea that you can be or do anything if you work hard enough, what I've come to realize is that actually only works if all kids start in the same place, and kids in rural and urban areas are not being afforded those same opportunities. And that is what we have to fix. When I think about my school district, when I first came in 3 years ago, I took 6 months to figure out what was happening. There was so much being said, the poor performance, the negativity, the scandals that were going on. And I guess what I found was 3 particular things that needed to be fixed right away. First, we had an incredibly bloated central office, and I cut a third of it, and I put those resources down to the schools where money matters. The second is we had a real failure in leadership, and I replaced over 50% of the principals. And the last one is actually one of our strengths, which is the teaching staff. We only let go about 10% of the people that were teachers in my district because I felt like 90% of the people there were either great, good, or working hard to improve, and we could work with them. So when we went about crafting our plan, we kind of created this model called open architecture, and it really rests on 4 fundamental pillars. The first is academics and rigorous standards. We weren't aligned to the state standards. We weren't really having high expectations for our kids and pushing teaching and learning and pedagogy down to our teachers and making sure they got what they needed. The second one is high-quality enrichment opportunities for our kids. The third pillar for us is this idea of effort or mindset, and the last one is critical thinking. And I'd like to go through all 4 of them briefly before we go to the next speaker. Rigorous standards, academic performance. Lawrence has seen great gains recently. We are up in proficiency in both English and mathematics. Substantially in mathematics, we went from 28% proficient to 41%. English, after being flat for many years, is finally moving the needle. Our growth rates are pretty incredible, and this is based on the hard work of the teachers. We've cut our dropout rate in half, and we've raised our graduation rate by 15 points. All of this is done because of the quality of the teachers we have in our school system. One of the things that people don't understand about public education is there is wide variation in teacher quality in this country. It's wider than almost any other country in the world. Whereas other countries might have variation like this, America has variation like this. And you know that because you went to high school. And you had some great teachers, and you had some middle-of-the-road people, and you had some people that, frankly, who knows what they were doing. Rick Dufour is a famous principal, now presenter out of Chicago. He talks about a guy that goes and buys an old country inn on a bend in a lane out in a rural area. And on half the inn, he sets up his taxidermist shop. And on the other half of the inn, he sets up his veterinary clinic. And his slogan is, Either way, you get your dog back. Now, Rick wasn't trying to say that our kids are dogs. What Rick was trying to say is teaching matters. And so you need to make sure you have the right people in front of your children. We've had some solid gains. There's no doubt about it. But there's so much work to do. We are nowhere near satisfied by what's gone on in Lawrence. This is just where we started. I don't know if you can see the arrows. We're at the bottom of most comparable cities now. For growth, we're at or near the top. We're proud of the gains made on test scores. And I will never abdicate the need for test scores. As someone that remembers city education before we were compared to our suburban peers, sometimes city education was more about classroom management and it was less focused on teaching and learning. And that was wrong. So we need to be able to be judged against all the other kids in the state of Massachusetts or in the country. But it's not just all about test scores. I've seen some high-performing city schools that have these amazing test scores, even better than the wealthiest suburbs. But they don't graduate kids through college in 4 years at the same rate as those wealthy suburbs. So we're missing something. One of the things we think in Lawrence we're missing is high-quality enrichment opportunities. Our kids need to have musical theater and dance and sports and debate league and Legos. I had a middle school kid when I was a deputy in Boston. His name was Michael, profoundly organically dyslexic from the Edison Middle School. We put on a district-wide professional production of Godspell at a professional theater, sold out 3 nights. Michael could not read the script, but he memorized the entire script. More than that, he carried the show. He fixed his friends' lines when they messed up. He was unbelievable, such that on the second night, we had a critic in from New York who actually reviews Broadway shows. And he said to me afterwards, he's like, if that kid keeps up at this, in 10 years, he could be on Broadway. Now, Michael may never pass the state ELA test, but there's nothing wrong with Michael. He has amazing skills. And it can't be just all about the state test. We've got to make sure our kids have the full enrichment experiences. Some things, by the way, don't show up on a test. Being able to speak publicly, being able to work in a group. Not all of that can be tested. And we need to do a better job, by the way, of figuring out how to assess those things. So that can be just as important as the academic piece that we're promoting so often. The third thing we'd like to... Oh, my God, I'm so way off on my... Okay. The third thing I want to talk to you about is effort or mindset. Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, which is really important. It basically says this. You don't praise the result, you praise the effort for children. Hard work matters. In my district, we have a longer school day in our entire K-8 space. All of our elementary, middle, and K-8 schools have a longer school day where we add things like enrichment or intervention. We do both. And that's really important. We also have something called Acceleration Academies, which happen over our February and April vacation, where we take our best teachers and we recognize them, and we give them a huge honorarium, and we wine them and dine them and give them a trophy and bring them to Harvard University, and they get to see Doug Lemov and other great educators in the field. And then we ask them to work with our kids in small groups, 10 to 1, using data to make sure that our kids, based on the data, learn particular skills. We had 2,500 of our kids give up their February vacation to get this extra help, and another 2,500 in April to do the same thing, because hard work does matter. The last thing I want to talk about is critical thinking, and I think this is going to be kind of the wave of the future. We haven't really talked a lot about it. There's not being much said about it right now in the educational landscape. And this is the idea of taking your knowledge base, I was a philosophy major, so you might call it your epistemological net, and applying it in new and novel situations. The ability to synthesize, the ability to compare and contrast, to make inferences. These things are super important for how people have to function in the workplace. We've got to make sure that our kids do that. I'll give you a story which is a little bit related to this. When I was a principal in Boston, I did a candy sale. You all know the candy sales. You probably sold them. I got a call from a neighbor who was yelling and screaming at me for literally 10 minutes. I had no idea what the problem was. I said, ma'am, what's the problem? Finally, we got around to it. This candy sale, how could you do this? Are you out of your mind? I said, ma'am, what's the problem? It's just a candy sale. She says, the price. And I said, I don't think $1 is too much to ask for a candy bar. She said, $1? Your kids are selling them for $5. Now, Anthony got in trouble on that day. But there wasn't a large part of me that didn't really appreciate the critical thinking that he showed and the American entrepreneurial spirit that we have. In closing, I'd like to read to you a short story that was read to me when I first became an administrator by a principal who was a mentor of mine. It's actually the story when I first walked into the Lawrence Public Schools and I had to go and meet with the Lawrence Teachers Union that I read to them. And some of you may have heard it before, and that's okay, you can hear it again. It's called 3 Letters from Teddy. Teddy's letter came today, and now that I've read it, I will place it in my cedar chest along with the other things that are important in my life. I wanted you to be the first to know. I smiled as I read the words he had written, and my heart welled with a pride that I had no right to feel. I have not seen Teddy Stollard since he was a student in my 5th grade class 15 years ago. It was early in my career, and I'd only been teaching for 2 years. From the first day he stepped into my classroom, I disliked Teddy. Teachers, although everyone knows differently, aren't supposed to have favorites in class, but most especially, they're not supposed to dislike any children for any reason. Nevertheless, every year there are 1 or 2 children that one cannot help but be attached to. For teachers are human, and it is human nature to like bright, pretty, intelligent people, whether they are 10 years old or 25. And sometimes, not too often, fortunately, there will be 1 or 2 students to whom the teachers just can't seem to relate. I had thought myself quite capable of handling my personal feelings along that line until Teddy walked into my life. There wasn't a child I particularly liked that year, but Teddy was most assuredly one I disliked. He was dirty, not occasionally, but all the time. His hair hung low over his ears, and he actually had to hold it out of his eyes as he wrote papers in class. He had a funny smell about him that I could never quite identify. His physical faults were many, and his intellect left a lot to be desired. By the end of the first week, I knew he was hopelessly behind the others. Not only was he behind, he was just plain slow. I began to withdraw from him immediately. Any teacher will tell you it's more of a pleasure to teach a bright child. It is definitely more rewarding for one's ego. But any teacher worth her credentials can channel work to the bright kid, keeping him challenged in learning while she puts her major effort on the slower ones. Any teacher can do this. Most teachers do it, but I didn't. Not that year. In fact, I concentrated on my best students and let the others follow along as best as they could. Ashamed as I am to admit it, I took perverse pleasure in using my red pen, and each time I came to Teddy's papers, the cross marks, and there were many, were always a little redder and larger than necessary. Poor work, I would write with a flourish. Well, I did not actually ridicule the boy. My attitude was obviously quite apparent to the class, for he quickly became the class goat, the outcast, the unlovable, and the unloved. He knew I didn't like him, but he didn't know why, nor did I know, then or now, why I felt such an intense dislike for him. All I know is that he was a little boy that no one cared about, and I made no effort on his behalf. The days rolled by. We made it through the fall festival and the Thanksgiving holidays, and I continued marking happily with my red pen. As the Christmas holidays approached, I knew that Teddy would never catch up in time to be promoted to the 6th grade. He would be a repeater. To justify myself, I went to his cum folder from time to time. He had very low grades for the first 4 years, but no grade failure. How he had made it, I just didn't know. I closed my mind to the personal remarks in that cum folder. 1st grade. Teddy shows promise by work and attitude, but has poor home situation. 2nd grade. Teddy could do better. Mother, terminally ill. He receives little help at home. 3rd grade. Teddy is a pleasant boy, helpful but too serious. Slow learner. Mother passed away at the end of the year. 4th grade. Very slow but well behaved. Father shows no interest. Well, they had passed him 4 times, but he would certainly repeat the 5th grade. Do him good, I said to myself. And then the last day before the holiday arrived. Our little tree on the reading table sported paper and popcorn chains. Many gifts were heaped underneath, waiting for the big moment. Teachers always get several gifts at Christmas. Mine that year seemed bigger and more elaborate than ever. There was not a student who had not brought me one. Each unwrapping brought squeals of delight, and the proud giver would receive effusive thank yous from me. His gift wasn't the last one I picked up. In fact, it was in the middle of the pile. Its wrapping was a brown paper bag, and he had colored Christmas trees and red bells all over it. It was stuck together with masking tape. For Miss Thompson, from Teddy, it read. The group was completely silent, and for the first time I felt conspicuous, embarrassed because they all stood there watching me unwrap that gift. As I removed the last bit of masking tape, 2 items fell to my desk. A gaudy rhinestone bracelet with several stones missing, and a small bottle of dime store cologne, half empty. I could hear the snickers and whispers, and I wasn't sure I could look at Teddy. Isn't this lovely? I asked, placing the bracelet on my list. Teddy, would you help me fasten it? He smiled shyly as he fixed the clasp, and I held up my wrist for all of them to admire. There were a few hesitant oohs and ahs, but as I dabbed the cologne behind my ears, all the little girls lined up for a dab behind their ears. I continued to open gifts until I reached the bottom of the pile. We ate our refreshments and the bell rang. The children filed out with shouts of, "See you next year," and "Merry Christmas," but Teddy waited at his desk. When they had all left, he walked up to me, clutching his gift and books to his chest. "You smell just like my mom," he said softly. "Her bracelet looks real pretty on you, too. I'm glad you liked it." He left quickly. I locked the door, sat down at my desk, and wept, resolving to make up to Teddy what I had deliberately deprived him of, a teacher that cared. I stayed every afternoon with Teddy from the end of the Christmas holidays until the last day of school. Sometimes we worked together. Sometimes he worked alone while I drew up lesson plans or graded papers. Slowly but surely, he caught up with the rest of the class. In fact, his grade averages were among the highest in the class, and although I knew he would be moving out of state when school was out, I was not worried for him. Teddy had reached a level that would stand him in good stead the following year, no matter where he went. I did not hear from Teddy until 7 years later, when his first letter appeared in my mailbox. "Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I'll be graduating second in my high school class next month. Very truly yours, Teddy Stollard." I sent him a card of congratulations and a small package, a pen and pencil gift set. I wondered what he would do after high school. 4 years later, Teddy's second letter came. "Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I was just informed that I'll be graduating first in my class. The university has not been easy, but I liked it. Very truly yours, Teddy Stollard." I sent him a good pair of sterling silver monogram cufflinks and a card, so proud of him I could burst. And now today, so many years later, Teddy's third letter came. "Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. As of today, I'm Theodore J. Stollard, M.D. How about that? I'm going to be married in July, the 27th to be exact. I wanted to ask if you could come and sit where Mom would sit if she were here. I'll have no family there as Dad died last year. Very truly yours, Teddy Stollard." I'm not sure what kind of gift one sends to a doctor on completion of medical school and state boards. Maybe I'll just take a wedding gift. But a note can't wait. "Dear Ted, congratulations. You did it yourself. In spite of those like me, and not because of us, this day has come for you. God bless you. I'll be at that wedding with bells on." We have a time in education which is very, very polarized. People are angry. Adults are fighting with each other. We have to move out of those silos and move towards synergy. Change only comes when people work together. I've seen the fights over whole language and phonics. I've seen the fights over charters and traditional districts. James Joyce would say, "I shall try to fly by those nets." At the end of the day, it all comes down to execution anyway, and people getting together in small groups and making it happen on behalf of children. We spend so much time on the stock market and on the housing market. Imagine if we as a country spent time on our children and rebuilding this country. We're wasting generations of talent, my friends. We've got to do better. Thank you very much.